So a lot has been discussed about the 2025 class as we gear up for the NFL draft next week, and Dynasty managers already know how insane the 2027 class is already shaping up to be, but everybody seems to be ignoring the 2026 class because everybody is saying that the class is terrible, it sucks, not a single prospect is going to be good for Dynasty. And for months now, we have been hearing that over and over and over and
over and over and over and over and over and over and over and over and over and over and over and over and over and over again.
To where now, nobody wants those picks, and you're a sucker if you're buying them for anything of even remote value. Well, I wanted to test that. I wanted to see if the 2026 class is as bad as they say, or if it's a possible repeat of the 2022 class, which everybody said was terrible leading up to it, and it turned out to be a pretty good class overall for Dynasty. So I pulled a list of who currently appeared to be the current top 10 quarterbacks, top 15 running backs, and top 15 wide receivers in the 2026 class, and ran them through my marker system as if they were entering the NFL this year to see if the class is as bad as they say. So let's take a look at these spreadsheets, and you'll see here on the left, as I said, I pulled for the quarterback position the current top 10, or at least who appears to be the top 10 prospects for the 2026 class. You'll see Arch Manning is in here. You'll see that Nico Iamaleavin is also on here as well. I understand, don't yell at me. They're probably going to be 2027 class, but I just threw them in here because they are technically draft eligible. But I understand, fully understand, don't say anything in the comments, that both of those guys are probably going to be 2027 class, but they're 2026 eligible, so I threw them in here. On the right-hand side, these are the top 10 quarterbacks in this year's class, according to the marker system. And what I did as well to give a more fair comparison is some of the metrics that go into my marker system are based on combine metrics. That's not the case for the quarterback class, but for the running back class and the wide receiver class, we have combine metrics that weigh into the marker system. So what I've done for the running backs and wide receivers is I have removed the combine markers for those positions to give a more accurate and fair comparison in terms of production metrics versus production metrics for both classes to give a more fair comparison. But for quarterbacks, that's not necessarily the case because I don't have combine metrics for quarterbacks outside of height and weight, which I did pull height and weights for all of the quarterbacks according to what they're listed as. That may or may not be super accurate, but in terms of what they're listed at by their team, I do have that in there. So this is, at least for the quarterback position, a 1-to-1 comparison. And you'll see that the quarterback class doesn't appear to be all that great for 2026. Arch Manning isn't even grading out as the QB1, which makes sense. He's barely played. I don't even know if he has a handful of starts under his belt. I know he's played a couple of times for Quinn Ewers, but he's played like 5 or 6 games. So it makes sense that when I'm looking at production metrics, he barely has any production. And that's not necessarily his fault. Same with Nico. He's he has like a season under his belt, but not even grading out as a top quarterback in next year's class either. Just more of a lack of experience. Drew Allar, arguably the quarterback 1 in next year's class, assuming Arch and Nico aren't declaring, isn't grading out all that well. But again, he's kind of lacking experience. It's a really weird story with Drew Allar where he does have 2 starter years under his belt in the 3 years that he's been in college, but he hasn't been asked to do a whole lot, and he also has had 0 wide receivers in either year of him starting. He has not had a single notable wide receiver to throw to. Tyler Warren obviously had a 1,000-yard year, but that's a tight end, and he has had literally nobody else. I think Mitchell Tinsley's been like the best wide receiver he's had, and if you don't even know who that is, I don't necessarily blame you. So I'm hoping some of that gets addressed for Penn State this year. It's been a massive annoyance for me as a Penn State fan to watch this team and to watch Allar literally not throw to any wide receiver of note. So hopefully that gets addressed this year. But Allar also doesn't look overall fantastic on a production basis because he hasn't really had like a phenomenal year. He's just kind of had 2 mediocre seasons of under 3,000 yards and around like 25 touchdowns, which is fine. And again, with the context of not really having anybody to throw to outside of Tyler Warren last year, makes a little bit of sense, and he has all of the traits, all of the other stuff that you want to see on film, but he just doesn't really have the production to follow it as of today. Now, the two other interesting names I think in this class are John Mateer, who is listed as Washington State. That's who he played for, but he now is moving on to Oklahoma, which is, I think, a very, very interesting transfer for him. Him and his, I believe the offensive coordinator from Washington State is now the head coach for Oklahoma, or maybe he's just the OC for Oklahoma. But anyway, he's transferring over, Mateer's transferring over, and the news that broke basically this morning, that I'm recording this on Tuesday, that Jaden Ott, the running back from Cal, is also announcing that he is transferring for a spring transfer, and the number one landing spot for him that a lot of people have already kind of pegged him to go is Oklahoma. So the Oklahoma offense might be very, very interesting this year. And Mateer's numbers at Washington State were phenomenal last year. I think that he's actually the one quarterback on this list that I don't really see anybody talking about that they really definitely should be. I could see Mateer being a top 5 pick in next year's class, especially for any of those teams that, you know, you're looking at Cam Ward or Shador or Jackson Dart this year. Maybe you go for a positional player like the Browns or the Giants, or maybe the Raiders if Geno doesn't necessarily work out, or the Saints if they hold tight with Derek Carr for this year if he's healthy and they don't go for a quarterback. The Steelers, any of those other teams this year that don't necessarily go for that quarterback, they might look at a quarterback if they're in the top 5 next year. And I think Mateer might be a very, very interesting name at the top of the list next year. Klubnik is also very interesting out of Clemson. I think those are the top 2 guys, along with Drew Allar. Actually makes for a very intriguing quarterback class. Not even mentioning that, you know, what if Arch were to declare, what if Nico were to declare, which there's like a sub 1% chance, I think, that either one of them actually do. But I think we literally have 3 quarterback next year that are of interest as of right now. We got to see how they play in 2026. Obviously, they're not comparing to Cam Ward and Jackson Dart as of right now. They are grading out, at least, you know, all are grading out better than Shador, better than Jalen Moreau this year. But, you know, they're not up there with Cam Ward right now. They're not up there with Jackson Dart in my personal analytical system either. But they're close. They're not that far behind where another year of playing might actually elevate them, and, you know, they'll hit a few more of these markers. They look a lot better in the eyes of the NFL, put another good year on film, all that other stuff, to where the 2026 class, at least from the quarterback perspective, might not be all that bad. So especially if you're in a super flex league, you might have 2, 3, maybe 4 very interesting names that you could take a look at for the 2026 class. Maybe they're not amazing. They're not Caleb Williams. They're not Trevor Lawrence, but, you know, a couple like, you know, Justin Herberts, or a couple Tuas, or a couple like any of those other kind of names could be very, very just another. You might have another Cam Ward next year. I think that is at least a check mark for 2026 that we have interesting names even without Arch and Nico being in that class. I didn't even mention Carson Beck, who's also transferring to replace Cam Ward at Miami. So we'll see how that goes. And then we have, you know, Garrett Nussmeier's been an interesting name at LSU. He doesn't really hit on anything right now. So it's an interesting class, to say the least. And I don't think that we should be dismissing the class as a whole if we think that the quarterback class is going to be bad, because I don't think the quarterback class, as of right now, is shaping up to be all that bad, with some very interesting names, with another year still left for them to gain value, put good stuff on tape, have some good production this year, and we'll see how they go. I know a lot of people are pretty high on Oklahoma. Some people are already projecting that they're going to be a top 4 team in the CFP. So if that happens with John Mateer, I mean, even what he did last year at Washington State, he had like 15 rushing touchdowns last year to go with 29 passing touchdowns, if I remember correctly. So don't sleep on John Mateer, guys. All right, I'm going to skip past the running backs for a hot second. I want to move over to the wide receiver position because this is definitely the weak spot of the class as a whole. So as I mentioned before, this is 2026 compared to 2025. I erased the combine metrics for 2025. So I'm comparing just straight production versus production over 2 classes. And you could see that currently the best, the highest ranked wide receiver in 2026, Kevin Concepcion from North Carolina State, would be grading out somewhere in the Jalen Noel, maybe behind Trey Harris area. Ibuka gets slammed in my marker system because he never had elite production, because he was always the wide receiver 2 for his team. but he's still my wide receiver 3 in this class. That's just kind of a flaw that I kind of have a workaround for the marker system if you're not familiar. So I would not say that Ibuka is on the same level as Concepcion, and I would not say that vice versa. I would say Ibuka is a lot better, and that Concepcion currently is grading out somewhere in that Trey Harris, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, these guys that are outside the top 5 in this year's class, trying to look in, but might still be, early day 2 picks, but nobody really of note in the first round as of right now. I know a lot of people are really high on Carnell Tate. I currently am not. I think that he is a little bit overrated right now. A guy that I think is absolutely overrated is Zachariah Branch. Every single article that I see right now that's, way too early 2026 rankings, way too early 2026 mock draft, everybody still has Zachariah Branch as a top 3, top 5 overall pick in Superflex leagues next year, and I don't get it whatsoever. I mean, I understand that the talent was phenomenal. He came in as like a 5-star prospect that was going to look so fantastic, but he has not had any production at USC. Now he's transferring to Georgia. I think that he's just like a really, really bad Tavon Austin. I don't think that his game is going to translate at all to the NFL level outside of some gadgety work. Like I said, I literally think that he's bad Tavon Austin. So if you're trying to, give some wins for the 2026 class and you're still including Zachariah Branch in that, I would not be doing that whatsoever. And if you've been one of those people that say, well, hey, at least 2026 is Zachariah Branch, I might get an opportunity to draft him next year as like a, rose and amongst a bunch of thorns. Nah, man, I would remove Zachariah Branch entirely from the 2026 class. I would not even consider him a top prospect. I wouldn't even consider him a first round rookie in the 2026 class. So just remove him from the process for next year. And that, in a lot of your guys' eyes, might make the class even worse. I get it, but he hasn't done anything at all to merit anything close to being the wide receiver 1 or even a top 3, top 5 wide receiver in next year's class. He wasn't even the best USC wide receiver prospect. Mekhi Lemon is a better wide receiver prospect today on USC than Zachariah Branch. It was Branch's transferred. They had another transfer that went to Penn State, so we'll see how that goes for Drew Allar to actually have a receiver to throw to. Lemon is basically the last man standing at USC, so we'll see if he's actually able to put together a really productive season as kind of like the wide receiver 1 for USC. If that's the case, that'll definitely vault him up. I know a lot of people are also very in on Evan Stewart. I think he's a 5th-year guy out of Oregon. There was question marks on whether or not he was going to declare this year. I'm not all that in on Evan Stewart. I think he's honestly worse than Tez Johnson, and nobody likes Tez Johnson in this year's class. So I don't know. Maybe another year we'll change things, but then we'll be talking about him having like a 5th-year breakout and what's the hit rates on that being immensely low and blah, 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 blah. Nick Harbor is an interesting name. I think Eric Singleton is an interesting name. Antonio Williams. Like, there are guys that if they have good production this year can climb the list. But when you're looking at the 2026 class as a whole, especially using my marker system based on what they've done through 2 years already, there is nobody that comes close to anywhere inside the top 5 for this year's class. Luther Burden by this time last year had already had a 1,000-yard season. Tet McMillan, I think, had a 1,300 or 1,400-yard season as a sophomore. It's just like Kyle Williams broke out as a freshman in 2020. Jaden Higgins, I think, had almost a 1,000-yard season this time last year. Alec Ayomaner has kind of been up there. Trey Harris has kind of been up there already. Ibuka already had a 1,000-yard season by year 2 for him. He had it in 2022 when JSN was out for the entire year, so it was him and Marv with CJ Stroud. Ibuka already had that 1,000-yard season by year 2. So this wide receiver class in 2025 is just so much better than 2026. So if you're looking at drafting wide receivers next year, maybe some names pop up. Maybe we have some good production out of some of these guys in this season in 2025. But boy, I would not be looking at fixing your wide receiver position at all next year. This really is the biggest drag on the 2026 class, is that we currently don't really have any currently elite wide receivers in next year's class. And we'll see if a couple of these names pop up, if Nick Harbor can keep going, if Concepcion can keep going, if Lemon can break out, if Singleton and Williams and Carnell Tate can break out, although I'm not expecting much from Carnell Tate, given the fact that he's also there with Jeremiah Smith. So we'll see. We'll see on the wide receiver position. But that's why I wanted to talk about them, just because that is 100% the weak spot. Oh, I forgot to mention, I had this note over here on the side that it does currently look to see as if 2026 may not have a single wide receiver over 10 markers hit. We do have 3 of them already this year for 2025 in Luther Burden, Tet McMillan, and Kyle Williams. Travis Hunter would also already be at 10 markers had he actually tested. Had I gotten a 40 and a burst score from him, he would 100% be up and have hit on all those athleticism metrics. All that before the NFL draft. So some of these guys might even get there with second round draft capital or first round draft capital too. So where we already have 4, maybe 5 or 6 wide receivers this year that are over the 10 markers hit. Next year, we might not even get 1 wide receiver with over 10 markers, which has happened before. There have been 2 classes since 2003, so since the entire span of my marker system, that did not have a single wide receiver hit 10 markers. The most recent one was 2023, and then the other one was 2013, so 10 years apart. 2023, though, actually gave us some pretty good wide receivers. It gave us Puka, gave us JSN, gave us Zay Flowers, Rashee Rice, Jordan Addison, Tank Dell, Josh Downs, a couple other guys that you can note. So, 2023, even without hitting well as a class analytically, still gave us some good names for Dynasty. 2013 also gave us some very good names. DeAndre Hopkins was the wide receiver 1 in that class in my marker system with 9 markers, so he didn't get to 10, but Hopkins obviously been one of the best fantasy wide receivers of the past decade. It also gave us Keenan Allen, another one of the best wide receivers of the past decade. Gave us Robert Woods. Also conveniently was the Tavon Austin year. I said the Zachariah Branch was like a bad Tavon Austin, so it's kind of convenient that Tavon did not grade well in 2013, and Zachariah Branch, if he declares next year, will also not be grading out well, barring some phenomenal breakout season at Georgia. But those are the last 2 classes that have not had a wide receiver hit over 10 markers, and 2026 might be the third one to join that on the list. But I wanted to highlight that to show that just because analytically some of these wide receivers may not look good, that doesn't mean that we can't still get productive wide receivers in the NFL and for fantasy football. It's just you're going to have to pick and choose. Maybe some of it's a landing spot thing. Maybe some of it might be more of a film thing than an analytical thing, kind of like Puka or, like Hopkins, so to speak, or Keenan Allen kind of fell to day 3. He shouldn't have. JSN didn't do well in my marker system just because he missed his final year. So there is a little bit of an asterisk on that one. Flowers, Rice, Addison, Downs, Tank Dell didn't hit on everything that I want to see, but that doesn't mean they weren't good prospects overall. And that might be what we see in 2026. Again, that we have some names. We just need some production in 2025. All right, on to the running back class now. And this, I think, is going to be more of the highlight of the 2026 class because we do have already some very, very good names, and we have some other names that are still very, very interesting that could rise up with good 2025 production. Obviously, of course, the class is most notably at the top, Jeremiyah Love out of Notre Dame, and then my boy Nick Singleton out of Penn State. Both leading the class, already have 5 markers hit, which if you were to compare them to the 2025 class without athleticism metrics, would put them in this kind of, Omarion Hampton, Cam Scadaboo, Travion Henderson range, and actually ahead of Caleb Johnson and Quinshon Judkins. So we have 2 running backs in the 2026 class that analytically in my marker system would both vie for a top 3 ranking, I think, and both would be inside of my top 5. I think that it would push out Judkins for sure, probably push out Caleb Johnson as well. So it would be, if we were to rank 2025 and 2026, it would be Genty, Hampton, Travion, then Love and Singleton would be 4 and 5. So we have 2 running backs that are very comparable right now, 2 running backs that we are drafting in the mid to early first of Superflex rookie drafts this year. So that already just looks phenomenal. Then we have a few other running backs that are still very, very interesting that can comp to, other guys like Damian Martinez and DJ Giddens and, maybe like Ollie Gordon, Devin Neal in that range. We got Darius Taylor, the running back out of Minnesota, was highly productive last year. Roderick Robertson is the running back out of Georgia, who was with Trevor Etienne this past year. Jaden Ott, the aforementioned Jaden Ott, who I just said that earlier today was announced that he's going to be transferring from Cal, and a lot of people are thinking that he might go to Oklahoma. Also very, very productive, so we'll see where he lands. Katron Allen out of Penn State, the other running back. It's kind of like a Sony Nick Chubb kind of situation going on. Katron is an absolute pounder, where he can go through, and he's got a lot of juice through the tackles. And then Nick Singleton's kind of like the more pass catching, explosive, kind of like Judkins and Travion Henderson, where Katron's more like Judkins and Singleton's more like Henderson. Kind of got that dynamic going on with Penn State for the past couple of years. I think both running backs are very, very good. Katron is going to be a very good piece at the NFL level. Just needs to go to basically the right system. Don't think he's going to be a 3-down guy. Judkins projects that he could be a 3-down guy based on what he did in Ole Miss. Not sure if Katron projects to have that or will have that role, but I think that he could be a very, very good, like David Montgomery kind of player in a backfield. Singleton can be a 3-down guy, though, if he's given the opportunity. That's why he's more at the top of the list. And then just like a bunch of other very, very interesting names. Two guys that I very specifically want to point out. CJ Baxter, the running back out of Texas, missed all of 2024 with, I believe it was a Liz Frank injury. So the same injury that Travis Etienne had in his rookie year with the Jaguars that kept him out all year. CJ Baxter, I believe it was also a Liz Frank injury that kept him out in all of 2024. He was projected, with Jonathan Brooks leaving, like how he took over for Bijan, then Brooks left, was a second-round pick. Everybody was in on CJ Baxter. I believe he was actually the number 1 rated running back recruit in his class coming out of high school. Went to Texas and was primed for a breakout year with Brooks gone, and then had that injury, sat out all of 2024. So it'll be interesting to see if he, how well he plays this year in 2026. Maybe he's a 2027 name. He could kind of try to raise his value again in 2027. And him and Arch Manning running back for 2026. I could see that happening, but as of right now, he is a very interesting name to still keep an eye on as we're watching this season, because he is draft eligible, and if he does really, really well, he could declare and be a very, very good prospect in this class. I could see him being I could see him honestly being the RB1 in next year's class. He has that high of a ceiling, above Love, above Singleton. He just needs to have that production, essentially. And if he does, I could see baseline RB5 ceiling RB1 in next year's class. The other name that's very, very interesting is Justice Haynes. For the past couple of years, he's been with Alabama, just recently transferred to Michigan for this year, which is a very interesting landing spot because Michigan lost both of their top 2 guys in Donovan Edwards and Khalil Mullings. So Justice Haynes was, I believe, the 3rd rated running back recruit in his high school in his year. It was CJ Baxter. I forget who RB2 was. Then it was Justice Haynes as RB1, RB2, RB3 in terms of recruits out of high school. Haynes didn't do all that much at Alabama for the past couple of years, but now the door is wide open for him to produce as the starting running back from Michigan in 2025. And I know a lot of people are still very, very high on him. So if he produces this year, I could see him also entering the top 3 conversation for next year. We could be looking at the 2026 classes, not so much like how 2025 we have like a whole bunch of depth names, but I could see us talking about, the top of the list, Ashton Genty aside. But between Love, Singleton, Baxter, and Haynes, that's a pretty solid top 5. And I'm not even mentioning Jaden Ott, not even mentioning Katron Allen or Darius Taylor or, Mekhi Hughes or any of these other names that are also very interesting in here, that we could have some pretty heavy hitters at the top in 2026 while also having some nice depth for, the late first, early second round, depending on draft capital for a lot of these guys, and assuming that a lot of these guys actually do declare. The Penn State boys both pretty much are set to declare their 4th years. Both of them are 4th years this year. Love, I would be shocked if he didn't declare next year. And we'll see with some of these other guys, depending on their production in 2025, if they declare or not, or maybe they just continue to enhance the 2027 class overall. But 2026 running backs, I think, are showing out very, very well. So between a few of the names that we've already listed for running backs, like I said, we have like 2, 3, maybe even 4 very interesting quarterbacks that we could talk about for Superflex leagues. Probably get another couple wide receivers in there just because it's the wide receiver position and the NFL needs it. We'll need it for Dynasty. I I mean, I basically just filled out almost a first round of Superflex rookie drafts for 2026. So it's there. There's definitely a possibility for 2026 first rounders to still have some value next year and to still have some very, very good names that are comparable to what you're getting in 2025. Not so much like the 108 in 2025 is the same as the 108 in 2026, but there's some comparable prospects that, you'll probably have to pay an earlier first for in 2026, but you'll get somebody very similar to what you're getting in 2025 with still a first round pick. But guys, another thing that you have to remember when you're projecting for the 2026 class is that I just pulled names that currently look like they're the top 10, top 15 players at each of their positions, but a lot of things are still going to change in the 2025 NCAA season. Our confidence in some of these guys might massively increase between now and next year. Some players I'm not even listing as the top prospects in their position might join this list next year after huge breakout seasons in 2025 that we never saw coming. Perfect example. I Googled early 2024 Dynasty rookie rankings to find articles and videos about the 2024 class in the spring of 2023. I found multiple early 2024 mock drafts that had Bo Nix and Michael Penix as late second round picks in Superflex mocks. Rome Odunze was in the early second round of these mock drafts. Malik Neighbors was like a late first round pick. And I even saw one Reddit thread of it talking about some of these early mock drafts where a guy literally said, I'm find myself very high on Malik Neighbors. I could see myself taking him around the 105 to 106 next year. That's how high he was on Malik Neighbors. That was a year before the 2024 class actually came out. People were saying, well, maybe I'm high on Malik Neighbors and I might take him in the early first. That's crazy to think about how much value he gained just in one season in 2023 to where he was drafted in 2024. Now he's a top 5, top 3 Dynasty wide receiver, all in the span of literally like a year and a half to 2 years. You want to know who else wasn't even in the conversation in all of those early mock drafts? Speaking of this LSU team, Jaden Daniels and Brian Thomas Jr. Neither one of them were on anybody's radar, and they really shouldn't have been, given the fact that Jaden Daniels had mediocre production in 4 years across 2 schools in his college career. Brian Thomas Jr. had 700 receiving yards combined through 2 years up to that point in 2023. No one was predicting that offense to go nuclear and now produce, like I said, a top 3 Dynasty quarterback and 2 top 7 or 8-ish Dynasty wide receivers. You go back just 1 year ago, you look at early 2025 rookie mocks, you see Ashton Genty in the mid to late first in some mocks. Definitely not the generational 1.01 that he is right now. You see Omarion Hampton in the late first. Travion Henderson is also in the late first because at that point, he had been hurt for 2 years in a row, and people are wondering if he's just a one-year wonder from his 2021 freshman season. No one was talking about Caleb Johnson anywhere last spring because he hadn't even really been a starter, and now he's inside some people's top 3 running backs for this class. Again, the point of all of this is that a lot of stuff can still change in one season of college football, where some guys who kind of look meh right now produce extremely well and raise our confidence in them, raise their draft stock into NFL, while other guys who aren't even on the map right now can come out of nowhere into the first round of rookie drafts. And sure, maybe this video is more highlighting that the depth of the class next year isn't going to be all that good, especially if you don't really have a good wide receiver class. We're more reliant on the running back position. I didn't even talk about the tight ends, but there's no real tight ends to talk about either. So where you might want to use those 2026 seconds and thirds for upgrades or cheap contending pieces to win this year, all of that I think is very much okay to do, but a first round pick is still a first round pick, no matter what class you're in. And because the overwhelming sentiment around 2026 right now is so extremely bleak, I believe that that could be a major market inefficiency that we should be capitalizing on, especially if you end up buying a random first and it ends up being a top 5 pick. People are still going to want a top 5 pick no matter what class it's in. They'll fall in love with these prospects. They'll get FOMO for not drafting in your rookie draft. They'll want to start rebuilding and they won't be able to buy 2027 picks because everybody already knows that that class is stacked. People are already hoarding those picks and they're even more expensive a year from now. So they're going to come to you for 2026 picks at a much cheaper price, and those will also be worth more a year from now than they are today. So take shots at this class in the first round. I'm not saying you need to invest into the entire class, but if you can buy an extra first or two for super cheap because everybody hates this class, Do it. Send Chris Olave for that random first round pick. Send DK Metcalf for George Pickens for a first. Ricky Pearsall for a first. Justin Fields, Jerry Jeudy, Jaden Reed. Shed your age if you're not looking to compete, like Terry McLaurin, Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, Alvin Kamara, Devontae Adams, maybe even somebody like Najee Harris before the NFL draft. I'm telling you, I have seen some absolutely horrible trades go down involving 2026 first that you might even grab those picks for players less valuable than the examples that I just gave you. It depends all entirely on how desperate that person is, how much they want to try to win in 2025, or how much they hate the 2026 class. All you need to do is just give it a shot and just see what happens, because the worst they can do is say no to your trade proposal and you just move on to somebody else. But some people, like I said, really, really hate this class, and especially if they're trying to compete and they're trying to win it this year, they might just overpay hard for an asset that might not even help them win, but you got a first round pick off of them, and maybe you even pulled a top 5 or even top 3 first round pick next year to really increase your odds of a good rookie prospect.